Okay. Just give me 1 second. And I'll also post it to Cardano Telegram channels. We got about 20,000 people there.
Oh. We are officially live. Welcome to the channel, everybody. This is today's the last day in February, and I think it's been about a year, almost exactly since I last spoke to you, Charles. I think it was sometime last February you came onto the channel, and here we are. And for anybody that wants to ask any questions, I have you guys up on YouTube, and we'll just have a chat here. And Charles today is in his car. He was running busy on the road. Welcome to back to the channel, Charles.
It's good to be on. And I actually pulled over into a parking lot, so I'm not driving while doing a podcast.
I actually saw, I think it was, what's his name? Do you know the channel Crypto News? What's his name? Is it Omar? He used to do a lot of podcasts in the car while driving, and he popped into my mind while you pulled over right now.
Well, you know, the first guys to do that in the cryptocurrency space were Leon and Tai Zen. And Leon had a Maserati, and he'd actually do calls or interviews in his car, and you'd see a nice little Maserati symbol in it.
Yeah.
But I guess it kind of caught on. But Omar's a nice guy. I really like his work.
Yeah. He's one of the first guys I started watching, actually. So where have you been lately? Where are you situated? I know that you live in Colorado, and between working on Cardano and IOHK being in Hong Kong, where do you find yourself these days?
Well, last year I went to 30 countries, 58 events. So I pretty much live on a plane. I travel anywhere between 200 to 250 days a year. Depending on who you ask, it's either for business or I'm just on an opulent food tour. So it just depends on whether people like me or not, their opinion. But levity aside, mostly it's just work events, conferences, meetings with heads of state or governments, and IOHK business or Cardano business. So I'm pretty much everywhere. I just got back from Norway. I was in Oslo and Tromsø, actually. So I tried to chase the northern lights, and I spent some time snowshoeing. I didn't have a chance to dog sled, though, because the weather was just too bad. So every now and then I get a little bit of a break, but usually that's a weekend trip somewhere. Or more often than not, it's just hotel, taxi, train, plane.
Did you get a chance to see the northern lights while there, or did they not come out?
We certainly tried, though. We drove all around Tromsø and even Finland, and we couldn't quite see them. The weather just was not so good for viewing. Usually you have to spend about a week and go out every night, and within a 7-day period you'll be able to find an opening in the sky to see the lights. But it was a lot of fun. We got to hang out with the Sami people and deal with some of the zombie reindeer, and get some nice jerky and set a fire in the middle of nowhere and deal with -20 weather. Cool. It's very cold up in Tromsø. It's right in the Arctic Circle.
I was actually there about 2 or 3 years ago, and I was fortunate enough to spend a week looking for orca whales as well as the northern lights, and I got to see them, fortunately, I think twice. And the funniest part was when you shoot it with a camera and you have your exposure on for a really long time, some of the pictures are a lot greener than it actually looks in the sky. And really surprised me, I guess, looking at all the photos online, thinking that, well, God, it could be this green or that gorgeous. But I did get some really cool, fortunate to see them anyway. Like you said, you have to really kind of be there and be fortunate enough to have all the conditions of the weather line up.
Yeah, it's a big challenge.
Where has been, I guess, some of your biggest places that you stayed in the last year, or some of your favorite moments of, touring all these different places and having a chance to speak? What are some of your, I guess, highlights from the past year, summed up, and try to catch us up to speed with Cardano and all your travels?
Well, what really been amazing is just to meet how broad of a community the Cardano ecosystem has. I mean, there's well over 100,000 people. No matter what country I go to, there's somebody there that likes ADA or is doing something with it, or just a fan of our ecosystem.
Hmm.
So, for example, I was in Mongolia, and we met several people in Ulaanbaatar that were big Cardano fans. And I was in the outskirts of Mongolia, and I met a camel herder who owned Bitcoin, which was just a surreal experience. I mean, they're like 900,000 people of a 3 million person country are nomads, and yet still they're using cryptocurrencies, or at least they're aware of them. So that's a pretty powerful thing, and it was a pretty humbling thing. Going throughout Africa was also a great experience last year. We went to Rwanda and South Africa and Ethiopia, and we got to meet a lot of really cool, interesting different projects, kind of like Uber for vegetables and restaurants, to like takes on Airbnb, and people writing Solidity code, or doing cool things, and that was a lot of fun as well. The coffee farmers in Ethiopia were good to talk to, and that whole industry's really cool. We have some content coming out pretty soon about that. And then there's various other things that we did, but 30 countries is just a blur. It's like every single week, literally, you're doing something or going somewhere. But there's the common thread between all of it was that there's a lot of passion, a lot of excitement, and a lot of desire to actually change things and build better things. No matter how
Hmm.
tired you get, or what happens to the price, or how much criticism you get over Reddit and Twitter from toxic people, what reinvigorates you and keeps you going is the fact that you see people who have real life problems,
Hmm.
who actually want to solve those problems. And they can be simple problems, or they can be very complicated problems. There's a doctor in the mountains of Nuba, and his issue is he's got to every year find a way to get enough medical supplies to allow him to keep his operation going. And every time he tries to move them in, people try to steal them from him, or checkpoints try to ask for bribes or things like that. So there's a lot of secrecy that's required. There's special tools that are required to get that done.
Hmm.
Down to, in South Africa, in the townships, people are building homes, and when they build it in a place with 30% unemployment rate, people show up at the work site and say, "Hey, hire me. I'm an electrician, or I'm a carpenter." But they have no CV, they have no education history. So how do you document these people? How do you identify them? How do you actually know if they're credible or not, and give them a reputation system? So there's real problems across the whole world, and the tools we have to solve those problems in the legacy system, they're just not cutting it out for everybody. And the whole point of the cryptocurrency blockchain space is to say we have a whole new tool set that may not necessarily solve all the issues, but it allows us to solve a broader class of problems. And also, in the process of doing that, create better channels to move value around, or to represent value, and make sure that people can have a more fair participation in the global markets. So, when you actually talk to people and see the light in their eyes, and see the excitement that they have about the prospect of being able to, for the first time in their lives, make progress and solve things, that's, I think, the most humbling part of the journey. And it's something that just keeps refreshing me and keeps me going, because it's not easy. It's really painful when you've worked like literally 2 days straight, then to be criticized on Twitter and told, "Oh, the only reason you're there is to go have a steak or something." I assure you, the meat
Hmm.
is much better in Colorado than it is in a lot of the countries I go to. I don't need to travel anywhere for a good meal. I can get it here. Yeah, I can go to work. And so if that's the only thing that you see, it eats away at you over time. But when you contrast that with actually making progress, talking to real people, it makes all of that stuff seem trivial and nonsense, and it allows you to keep going.
I think to your point, social media can really be really toxic. I've experienced it. My partner and I have experienced it with just what we do, and it can make it challenging. And something that is rewarding is when you do see things work out and you see the technology start to be developed, and it's something that I think has, in my opinion, if I could summarize the past year, I think it's just been, I think, a lot of development going on behind the scenes, and then people are obviously always wanting money, and there's not as that much of that in the market anymore as there used to be. But I don't think that means that there's has been a waning interest in the development of the technology. I think it's kind of behind the scenes, and it's not seen as much, and what you see on Twitter and social media and stuff isn't always an accurate representation of the development, price, anything.
And you have to have empathy and understand, well, where are these people coming from? A lot of the people that are toxic, their issue is that they lost a lot of money. I
Yeah.
mean, some people have lost more than 90% of their value, in some cases their entire life savings, because they made bad financial decisions,
Mm-hmm.
all in the top of a bubble. And so they want somebody to blame. They want to say, well, this is the reason why. But at the end of the day, Cardano could cure cancer and HIV, and we could solve world hunger, and the price probably wouldn't move up in these particular markets. And so that's the problem with these bubbles. It's the same with Amazon. When in 2000 they reached their peak. It took 11 years for them to get back to that point. It doesn't mean Jeff Bezos wasn't working or Amazon's a bad company. It's the reality of bubbles, and this is what markets do.
Mm-hmm. Charles, can you hear me? I lost your voice.
Hang on a second here.
I can hear you now. You're just a bit muffled. Something, I don't know if it's just buffering or.
Yeah, sorry, it kicked into my car's Bluetooth for some reason. I'm not sure why.
You're
But
good now.
they're just not sophisticated, and as a consequence, they got and lost their shirt. Now they're just angry, and they're looking for some place to put their
Vent.
rage. But they don't really focus on foundational things. Like with the Cardano project, from a scientific viewpoint, there is no project in the entire cryptocurrency space that's done as much science as us. That's just a
Correct.
fact. We've written more than 40 papers, half of which have gone through peer review at major venues. We've considerably advanced the science of proof of stake. We've considerably advanced the science of side chains. We've hired all the big PL guys, and we massively advanced the science on the programming language side. We've designed now 2 programming languages, and we pushed Ethereum into the formal method space synergistically because of the KVM work and so forth. So there's just like enormous scientific output there. So if you're looking at this just as a science project, you'd say, wow, these guys are good at what they do. They're very efficient. They're publishing things all the time. And it's inspiring a lot of people to cite them and move in that direction. But then from an engineering side, we've written 2 huge code bases, a Rust and a Haskell code base. We've written a browser-based client, which is now turned into an Android and iOS client through Emergo and the Yoroi project. And we're now deploying Shelly into market. We were #1 last year for GitHub commits. So they say, oh, it's just a science project. It's just a white paper. They have no working product. The wallet doesn't work. They just say these just asinine, insane things. But when you actually look at objective metrics, from publication volume to third-party validation of the publications to the deployment of the protocols, we're moving faster and with more ferocity than I'd say any project in the space. And it shows, there's just beautiful, elegant things in our specifications and in our designs, and it's easy for us to go from the specification to actual code. That wouldn't be the case if we were all just incompetent and we didn't know what we were doing. And unfortunately, the space has no ability in a broad way to actually vet legitimate, real things from bad things. Like with the EOS debacle, they include a block because one of the block producers decides to do it. It tells you they have no Byzantine resistance in their protocol. So if 1 of 21 decide to do something, the protocol still goes along with it. That is not a BSP protocol by definition. Yet they just are just, oh, who cares? We don't care. I was like, well, then why don't you just run your damn code on Amazon? Well, why are you even going to this layer of abstraction if basically there's no Byzantine resistance to your system and 90% of the supply is owned by 1% of the people, so you never get a decision on who those people are that are actually executing things. You're just building a Rube Goldberg machine for the purpose of building it so you can create a speculative instrument. You're not actually innovating or doing anything, or you're not actually cost effective. But yet there's a whole cadre of people that when they see this criticism, they go into fake news mode and they say, I don't care what you have to say. I don't care any about your arguments. I don't care about objective reality. I'm a bag holder for this. So I'm just going to go down this road, and that's the way it is. And you say, great, but you can't build an ecosystem on that. You can't build a community on that. You're just building a cult, a very small cult that'll eventually self-implode when the leadership goes wonky.
I think we've seen that with some cryptocurrencies already. I know we've seen that with some cryptocurrencies already. And
Right.
something I want to ask you is, I have some questions here, and I'm also looking at questions from the audience, and I don't think we'll have time to ask all of them. I've got a bunch of things, so I'll try to pick some of the most interesting that I see and coupled with some of mine. But I wanted to ask you, how do you guys see yourselves regarding STOs? So a lot of the market recently has been under scrutiny and being regulated, especially in the United States. I can't speak about all countries. I live in the United States, and some speculate that anything outside of Bitcoin and Ethereum are, is basically it could be a security, and it's not listed officially as a security. Do you see Cardano as where do you see Cardano fitting into that picture, as well as crypto as a whole, and being sort of a security versus not a security, and being regulated and getting risking the potential of being shut down, like I've seen some cryptocurrencies and just disappearing altogether, and even some that might be in the top 10 or 15, even come under question. Something like Ripple recently. Do you see anything? What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a hard question to answer because there's no clear answer that's emerged in the market yet. The first problem is that the regulatory tests that exist were built in the 1930s and 1940s. So there's the Securities Exchange Act of 1933, and they defined something called an investment contract, and that was kind of the, well, I'll know it when I see it clause. And we kind of enumerate everything that's security. So we have some general purpose structure that if we think something is, we can go after it. And then people said, well, that's not fair. You have to have a test. So eventually they went after a guy named Howey. And in the 40s, the Supreme Court established a set of criteria that for the most part worked really well in a centralized setting. So you have a company, you have an issuer, or you have a person, and you're securitizing something, you're issuing it, there's an expectation of return, the returns come from the efforts of others, and there's this notion of commonality, horizontal and vertical, between you and the issuer. But then when you introduce decentralization, you say, well, even if you want to make that a security, well, who's the issuer? Who can you kill that would shut the whole ecosystem down? Like, you could look at Bitcoin, for example, and say, which company in the Bitcoin space could you shut down that would somehow make Bitcoin stop? Would it be Coinbase, Bitfury?
You can. Yeah.
So how do you then, in good faith and conscience, say, oh, that's a security? It's not. And so you can make a similar argument with Ethereum. At this point, there's so many people in the Ethereum ecosystem and so many companies that have a lot of money in the Ethereum ecosystem. Even if you get rid of the foundation and hit Vitalik with the bus, Ethereum would continue moving on. So at this point, it's basically decentralized. So then you run into this thing of, well, what is sufficiently decentralized, and should we still find a way to regulate certain people? And what you're really saying is people are making very poor financial decisions, and it's going to have very negative impacts on certain investors and other classes of people. And we want somebody to hold accountable for these poor decisions that people are making. In other words, we do. And it's really easy to scapegoat one party or another. So I think the challenge is that the regulation hasn't caught up with reality, and we are seeing regulatory changes. The state of Colorado, they just passed a law that basically allows for utility token sales. It defines what is a utility token. You can sell it, and you actually get an exemption from the state of Colorado's perspective, and they'll say it's not a security. But you have to adhere to certain standards. Your product has to be available, I think, within 6 months of the sale, and a litany of other criteria. Okay, well, that's one dimension. Wyoming also has been moving in that direction. So we actually have seen some regulatory progress where we're starting to see asset differentiation between something that's truly a utility, like an Ethereum or a Bitcoin, from something that is a security. Like, for example, if I tokenize bars of gold in my basement, or shares of my company, and I have a dividend connected to them, and I give them to you, or something like that. So I think we'll reach that level of sophistication organically in the next 3 to 5 years, and the market will sort its way out. If you look at the enforcement that the SEC has done, mostly it's been focused on obvious scams. So the projects where people had really no intention of delivering anything of value to market. They were just taking advantage of arbitrage, that the markets were in a certain configuration that they could soak up lots of money. They made wild claims that had no evidence behind them and no intent to actually even be true. So the BitConnects, the OneCoins, these types of ventures, but usually smaller because they're much easier to litigate. And the purpose of this is to test the waters and assert their dominion, to say, hey, we're in charge of this whole thing. So you don't go prosecute the hard cases. You go prosecute the easy cases first, because you get some momentum and then you get some establishment of what the rules happen to be. So I think they're working their way through it. But inevitably what will happen is more states will follow Colorado and Wyoming's lead, and then eventually the Congress is going to have to make a decision, and it's going to pass some form of cryptocurrency legislation. And it probably will end up being comprehensive in that it won't just cut the securitization component, but it'll also touch things like taxation and also the money service business licensure dilemma that we have. If you run an MSB and you want to operate in the United States, you don't get just one license. You have to get more than 40, and it's like $1 million, and it's a lot of effort and it takes a year or two. And it's just really unnecessary that we have that kind of a structure when our competitors like the UK and Singapore and Hong Kong and others are just considerably friendlier and easier to work with. Back in the case of Singapore, the regulators are in a Telegram group. So you can just reach out to the regulator over Telegram. It's a pretty amazing thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that'll come. And I applaud the Securities Exchange Commission for having a light hand. They certainly could try to be much more aggressive,
Mm-hmm.
but I think they're very wisely just saying we're going to focus on the things that are hurting the consumers the most, and we're going to see how good the industry is at self-regulating and how good the industry is at dealing with existential crises. The other thing is that there's a tendency to want to first regulate the exchanges because those are the greatest points of consumer vulnerability. When you have exchanges collapse all the time, everybody loses their money, or front running occurring, or the exchanges in some sort of insider trading incestuous deal with some of these token issuers.
Mm-hmm.
These really can hurt retail investors more than anyone else. So there's a lot of effort to try to clean up that act and make sure that they are following proper compliance and they have a fair book. And that proper controls are in place, that if the CEO dies, you don't lose all your money. And that's a pretty crazy story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but until that's resolved, I think that's probably their number one priority, followed by the obvious scams, and then the industry will gradually self-regulate. So what's already
Mm-hmm.
happening is if people are doing things that are questionable, they're offshoring, and they're arguing, well, and even if it is, maybe it's Reg S or something, or they're doing SAFT and they're selling the Reg D, so they're enjoying some form of exemption there. And then with the case of some retail participation, it's only occurring after the product has hit market at a certain level of decentralization where at least everybody has a fair shot. And as long as we're operating there, I think the markets will be okay. Where it gets a little problematic is when you have these big existential problems like EOS, where they raise $4 billion and they do this weird structuring thing with the Cayman Islands and everything else. And then the founders say we have no fiduciary or moral obligation to the ecosystem. Well, that makes it really complicated for the SEC, because if they say that's okay, basically what you're doing is telling the market you can raise $4 billion with no responsibility, no strings attached, and abandon the project at any time and walk away with all the money.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't tell the market that. You're not in that amount of money. Maybe if it's 4 million, who cares? It's too small. But $4 billion, I mean, that's what you get from a reasonable sized IPO of a 5-10-year-old company with an exciting product portfolio.
It's crazy.
You don't get that as a startup, and then once you raise the money, the CEO immediately resigns and walks away with all the cash and moves to Jamaica. I mean, so these types of things are creating existential issues for our industry as a whole, and they're forcing regulators to now get probably more aggressive than they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really unfortunate, along with crypto winter as well, the asset bubble and the deflation. Whenever a retail investor loses 90% of their money, that's a huge problem for them. So and they usually respond in kind with class action lawsuits, which are great invitations for the Securities Exchange Commission to get involved, because when you do these lawsuits, you're arguing that your assets is security and you're trying to have something like right of rescission, and then you're basically doing the homework for the SEC. They just copy the arguments you've made, and then they can have an enforcement action. So it's a very complicated Rubik's Cube, and it's not made easier by the fact that there's competing jurisdictions. So even though the U.S. has an opinion, Switzerland and Singapore have differing, and Malta has differing opinions, and people are playing that regulatory arbitrage game. And U.S. consumers are still getting exposed to these markets, almost like the online gambling days, 10 years ago, where, it's banned here, but you can still, somehow gamble abroad. And it's just going to take a few years to work its way through. And I think we'll eventually get there, and we'll be in a better position. And actually, I've seen a lot of progress in the last year on the regulatory side and the clarity side. And it makes me very hopeful that the U.S. will actually be a very good marketplace for cryptocurrencies long term.
I like your answer. I've seen some of the same things. I think a lot of toxic people that are kind of opposed to regulation and stuff. I think there's a thin line between trying to protect consumers versus what I hope is not stifling innovation and technology and development of some of these projects. And I kind of agree with you. It'll be interesting to see. I think it'll take time for some of that to sort of solve itself and work itself out. I have a question here from Crypto Kool-Aid that I'd like to ask you that I think is interesting. They ask, Charles, how much importance do you place on the actual people you work with as opposed to the actual projects they're working on?
I love the people that I work with. We have a very low turnover rate at IOHK. It's less than 5% usually. A lot of people have worked with me for years. For example, my co-founder worked with me when I was at Ethereum, as did my head of design, Richard Wild. And we've been together for 4 or 5 years now. And this industry moves really quickly. So that's like dog years, right? So that's like 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is that you want to be friends and have a good relationship with everyone that you're with, and you want to watch these people grow and make sure they get their fair share, and that they have challenges, and that they become better. But on the other hand, we're all slaves to the products that we build, and at the end of the day, if it doesn't ship, if it's not at the quality level it needs to be, if it has an issue, we've collectively failed as a company. And we have to hold ourselves accountable, and we have to be very aggressive at making sure that we don't continue to make the same mistakes. So you have to balance these two things, because if you're personal friends with people, sometimes you start making decisions to protect people as opposed to decisions for what's best for the product. So maybe it means you leave a particular manager in for too long, or maybe you follow doggedly some engineering philosophy a bit too long, and it actually was counterproductive for the company. So that's the challenge I think every company has to deal with. Also, being a startup, there's a lot of hope and expectation, and then you go into the cold winter and things get real tough. And so as you're a few years into it, that collective fatigue starts setting in, and you lose some people along that way. In some cases, good friends, just because they can't keep up with the pace. Because you really do work 60 to 80 hours, especially in a management role. So I value people a lot, and we invest a lot of money in training. We promote a lot of people from within, like our director of engineering came up from our enterprise group, started as a Scala developer, then he did the enterprise, the ledger, and then now he's the director of engineering. Our HR director, Tamara, she started as our culture officer in the company, and then she went to HR, and now she's spreading out and doing different things. So we try to grow people's careers up and give them larger and larger challenges, and we try to share pretty nice bonuses with everybody. And we're a distributed company. We operate in 16 countries. We have well over 150 people. And when you're operating like that, you can't tightly supervise people. I don't sit on a webcam watching somebody make sure they do their 8 hours of work. I have to trust them that they're doing that. Yet every day they keep showing up, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours of work. And they, in some cases, work on the weekends. For example, the Rust developers are right now in this giant hackathon in Hong Kong, where they're all living together and working together in this small office in Hong Kong, just writing Rust code like 7 days a week, not sleeping much, trying to get the daily testing out. And it's just a great personal sacrifice, and we admire the hell out of them for doing that. But they care very deeply about the product, and the people on the Haskell side do as well. And I think overall, it's just a magical company. And you try to do things to show people that you appreciate them. We try to have a summit once a year where we bring the whole company together, and we bring interesting guests. We try to have workshops, and we also, as I mentioned, do a lot of training. For example, the guy who created Haskell works for us, so we have him train people on that. And we also brought in John Hughes to train some of our guys on property-based testing. So in addition to the culture, it's also a place where you can learn skills and work with tools that are probably once in a career. As a developer, you're maybe writing JavaScript or Java or C++ more often than not. You're not writing interesting code. Here you're writing Haskell code, and you're using property-based tests and writing formal specifications, and verifying things are correct with Isabelle or something, which is a pretty crazy thing, right? You don't normally do that as a developer. And oh, by the way, you're also working with cryptographers and programming language experts and game theorists, and you're taking like cutting-edge research that's fresh out of the lab, and you're finding a way to actually build this, and you're the first person to ever actually implement this protocol. And if you get it right, it could become a protocol that's used for the next 50 years. So that is tremendously appealing to a lot of people, and that's why they're so loyal and passionate. And it's kind of my job to make sure that at the end of the rainbow, it's commercially viable and it's useful and it's a proper product, and that it has a commercial success and so forth. So it's a tough balance. I don't always get it right. Sometimes we have disagreements, but less than you'd think. And it's usually disagreements about the best route to get to the same end goal, rather than is that end goal reasonable or not.
Yeah.
And so far, I've been pretty happy with where I'm at. Now, I've had some legendary fights with some of my prior companies, like Ethereum and Dan Larimer, when I was working with BitShares. The case of Ethereum, that was just mostly a philosophical fight about whether it would be for profit or not for profit. Some people said some very horrific things and continue to do so, but for the most part, it's water under the bridge. It doesn't matter anymore. We've all moved on. In the case of BitShares, it's just, I can't work with Dan. We see the world very, very, very differently, and that's okay. Let bygones be bygones and move on. I think with any work relationship, it's very important to make it fail quickly if it's not meant to be. It's a real bad.
Sounds like a relationship. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, real bad deal to let a bad relationship linger for a very long time. And so sometimes you just have to cut it out, and it makes you a little heartless at times, but it's necessary for the greater good of the company and for, frankly, your own personal health and the other person's health as well.
Yeah, for sure. I want to ask a question, I guess, about, and someone asked it in a different way. Basically, they asked, Charles, what's your opinion on Cardano being beat by marketing? Superior technology sometimes isn't enough. And I kind of wanted to ask the same question, maybe in a different way, just wondering how, to be honest, I don't think there's a lot of platforms out there right now that are usable, aside from Ethereum. And honestly, the dApps that are out there right now, there isn't a lot out there that's working.
It's funny. We always get accused of having bad marketing, but there's over 3,000 cryptocurrencies, and we're in the top 15, and we've been in the top 15 since the beginning. And we haven't even launched the full product yet. We're still in a beta-esque stage. We're learning a huge amount of things. You can't quite do too much with the platform yet, and it's not accessible to everybody yet. Despite that, we have a huge community. We're in 25 exchanges. We're all across the world, and we're in the top 15 liquidity. So I'd say that for what was necessary, we did our job, and we're getting to a point where there's major milestones that are starting to roll out, like Shelley and Golden. And within the next 6 months, we're going to see this full decentralization and likely the beginnings of smart contracts and multi-asset. And at that point, pound for pound, we do everything Ethereum does, but better. And we're a lot faster and we're a lot cheaper to operate. And we have, in my view, a much better path to scalability. And not only that, the NIPA-POWs work and the proof of stake sidechains work means that we have the best light clients of any cryptocurrency in the entire space. And it's going to be very easy for us to roll in post Shelley, which means that Daedalus is going to start faster than any other wallet on market. You don't have to have a full copy of the blockchain to be able to safely use the cryptocurrency with full client security. So, okay, we're still moving, and we've made some missteps here and there, but all things considered, to go from nothing to being in the top team and have a product in the market, not have a major issue or event, be resilient enough to recover from things like the change of management, the Cardano Foundation, and keep our nose relatively clean. And we're kind of the Ned Flanders of cryptocurrencies in terms of our science and these things. No one criticizes us there who's reasonable. I think we've done a good job. Now, can we do a better job with marketing? Sure. But, the question is, when do you market? Well, you market when you want a certain group of people to adopt the platform. And we have kind of 3 different growth models. There's an organic growth model where people think that this is a good ecosystem just to get involved in. You do that through meetup groups. And that's why we started the Cardano Ambassador and soon the Cardano Hub program. That was stalled because the Cardano Free Foundation under prior management refused to do it. The new leadership is doing it. So we're kind of a year late there, but now it's getting restarted. And we have a bunch of ambassadors like CryptoLark and others. And they will bring meetup groups and other communities together. And the largest and most prominent of them will be given dedicated funding to become like mini foundations and continue to propagate the brand. So that's one growth vertical. Another growth vertical is through developers actually building real things. And so we need to get to Goguen to do that. But, we did the Plutus Fest last year, and Plutus is almost at a point where it's viable for developers to start playing around with it, trying it out. And there, I'd argue, we have a much better growth curve and adoption model than Ethereum does, because we're starting with very technical, highly skilled developers who are in a niche, who are actually probably capable of writing much better code than your average JavaScript developer. And they're more likely than not better able to attract legitimate funding, like VC funding instead of ICO funding and these things, that they can use to solve real problems. So, and we have a much more reasonable architecture where we're not saying, hey, we're going to reinvent the whole internet and basically force you to use a computer that's 1,000 times slower and 1,000 times more expensive than anything else. We're saying you can still write a server-client model application, but just put some of that logic on the blockchain that requires trustlessness. And that's what Plutus and Haskell and the compilation Pascal to JavaScript and to WebAssembly is all about with that model. So it's a new model, the Redeemer Validator model, extended UTXO. No one's done it before, and I think it gives us a huge, great niche to grow in that that will inevitably give us like 500-600 very useful, great killer apps that can allow a lot of growth around that platform. And then finally, the enterprise strategy that we have is going to bring millions of people into our platform organically. When we go and get every coffee farmer in Ethiopia on a blockchain, well, that permission ledger is going to give everybody wallets and digital credentials, which are interoperable with Cardano, so that they can use Cardano for lending and they can use Cardano for insurance and for other products. So, we can onboard lots and lots and lots of people for the first time ever, first cryptocurrency, first time they've ever been digitized in this way, where we can reuse those credentials and that infrastructure for them to actually interface with the cryptocurrency. And what am I going to do? Wire that onto Ethereum? Wire that onto EOS? No, I'm going to wire it onto Cardano, because it's just common sense. It's our product. So we have different channels to grow in, and some are our responsibility, some are responsibility of others. And as our product evolves, we're going to continue doubling down on things. I think a lot of the criticism of marketing comes from, well, why is the price not going up? Why am I not making more money? Why is Tron ahead of you? It's like, if Justin wants to burn $200 million to go do something like buy BitTorrent and then claim that that was the strategy, all great.
Yeah.
The dog barks, the caravan moves on. It's an old thing. Let them do their things. If you look at a slice of the top 10 cryptocurrencies year by year by year, you'll notice something change all the time. So just because one currency is ahead of you versus another one, at one point BitConnect I think was worth more than us. So look, just let the market burn itself out, and the people who have invested for the future and have a sustainable model will be here in 5 or 10 years, and real value will go into that platform because the platform is being used, not because it's a speculative instrument, but because it's organic supply and demand. But if your time horizon's much shorter and you just want to come in and out, I don't really want you in the ecosystem. You're just a damn nuisance. It's like Elon Musk and his short sellers that he's always at war with. It's like, look, his goal is to build battery powered cars and have everybody in the world have one. And so these people have a 6-month time horizon, really aren't part of that mission. They're just there to make a quick buck. No. So I couldn't care less about these people. And marketing will come, but it'll come in a responsible, sustainable, organic way. And it'll come in phases as the capabilities of the platform evolve. And we're here to stay. We'll be here for many years. And at some point, the ecosystem will be so diversified that there'll be hundreds of entities, just like there are with Bitcoin. I mean, was there a central Bitcoin committee that made a decision for BitPay to go and sponsor the St. Petersburg Bowl to have the Bitcoin Bowl? No, they just did that. And Coinbase did their own marketing, and everybody else did their own marketing. So every one of those entities was part of distributing the platform. And frankly, it's the same with Cardano. There are people getting Daedalus tattoos on their arms. There's
That's
people.
Pretty cool.
No, it's I can never change the logo now. So
Do you have any plans of getting on?
Well, yeah. People ask about that. Not at the moment, because I don't have any. The problem is I go to Japan a lot, and if you go to the bathhouses in Japan, if you have any tattoos, they don't usually let you in.
Oh boy.
So, and I really like some of these places like Spa World and so forth. They're really relaxing, and they have all these different themed tubs and things like that. And they put lavender in the water. So I don't want to be banned from Spa World.
Something I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned Ethiopia, and I think, in my opinion, and I've seen countries like Venezuela in the news, and I think Bitcoin and cryptocurrency has a broader use case, or a better use case for some of the things that you mentioned in some of these second and third world countries. And I want to ask you, how do you see Cardano, and how is Cardano working on getting into and kind of bridging itself with, well, not even legacy systems, to be honest, incorporating themselves as a system for really these second and third world countries, when I think a large amount of the money in the market right now is bought by someone like me in the United States or a first world country somewhere, and most of the money is probably from there for people looking to make money, where I think a lot of the use cases is probably like some of what you mentioned. How is Cardano actually going to work on that?
You first have to understand that there really isn't a third world anymore. I mean, if you look at Africa or South America, these economies are all growing at rapid rates. There's trillions of dollars of value that's there. In a lot of cases, the problem isn't that there's no money. The problem is that the market infrastructure is very poor. So there's a huge wealth disparity between the wealthy and the poor, and countries get screwed with their value. You know, when they sell their bauxite or they sell their uranium or their gold, they get 5 cents on the dollar instead of getting market rate. So if you get 20 times less for that same resource that your neighbor is getting, you know, that's not good for the country. The other thing is, because they don't have stable financial markets, it's difficult for people to preserve and diversify the wealth that they acquire. So you may be doing very well one year, but then the monsoon season comes, or a fire breaks out, or a war breaks out. The next year you've lost everything. So it's very hard to climb the social ladder. So when your problems are systemic like that, then the solution is you go in and you rebuild the systems themselves. Like, for example, coffee farming, there's humongous amounts of international pressure to completely reform that entire system because it's not sustainable. You know, the biodiversity in Ethiopia, they've lost over 90% of it in the last century. So that's just terrible. You know, this country where the lion is the symbol, and there's 2,000 left in the wild. So when you say, okay, there's pressure for fair trade, there's pressure for carbon reduction, there's pressure for sustainable, environmentally friendly farming practices. Well, how do you get there? Well, you have to measure things. You have to track things. You have to be able to scan the coffee cup and work your way back to where that bean came from. Well, the government needs to do this, or else they're not going to be able to trade anymore. They're not going to get subsidies anymore. So there's billions of dollars on the line. So there's a huge political reality where they must do something. So what you do is you come in and you say, look, we can take blockchain technology and use it as part of the solution for that problem, where your tracking traceability is now there, and you can start measuring things and do strategic intervention. Like you can start doing co-ops and pay farmers to stump their trees to increase output and blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the consequence of that. Once you've done that, you've also now suddenly given every single person in that ecosystem a digital credential. They have an identity now. You know who they are for the first time ever. And you understand their life. You have the metadata, you have collateral, you actually know what they own, you know what they produce, and you can then layer that with an accounting system, wallets, and then all of a sudden now you can link that to open cryptocurrencies, like, for example, Cardano. And then you say, okay, now if you want to get a loan to stump your trees, you can go through a decentralized lending app that's in our system. And then an American investor can look at that and say, wow, I can get a 15% return on my money, or whatever that is, giving a coffee farmer in Africa money. And there's all kinds of structures that can be layered in there to have high repayment rates. Like, for example, you lend to a group and the entire group has to repay, or else the group loses credits. The Grameen Bank innovated that model. Or another can be the loans are secured by like a government entity or the United Nations or something like that as part of a foreign aid package, where if they default, then some trusted third party will come in and pay out that. So, or they can be collateralized, like you'll end up taking part of the farm. They have to buy it back from you or something. All kinds of schemes you can come up with, but instead of these being accessible into a small group of very well-connected strongmen who take cut off the top, now it's a completely peer-to-peer system, and then suddenly that system can be chopped up and diced up to be retail accessible at the lowest possible cost. And oh, and by the way, you're using cryptocurrency as the transmission medium to actually move value from one person to the next person. That's just a magical thing, man. And so that's where we're focused, is to look at everything from property registration to business registration, supply chain management, voting systems. And that's a great way of getting into the door. Identity is at the core of most of these systems. And then once you have identity, you have a wallet and digital credentials. which then gives you the ability to know who can you do business with and who can't you do business with. And then suddenly you can now include 3 billion people who aren't there. And you can connect those people to a cryptocurrency as a value transfer system. So that's the relationship between the permissioned and the permissionless ledgers. And by the way, all the cell phones are moving in this direction. The S10 now actually has capabilities to store cryptocurrencies through Samsung Knox. Well, every phone within 5 years is going to have equivalent capabilities. So those phones will end up within the developing world within 10 years because of the upgrade cycles that people have. So this 12 gigabyte of RAM, 1 terabyte of storage S10 phone, which is just like a monster computer, in a few years will be in the hands of a coffee farmer in Africa who bought it for $10.
It is.
So,
it's crazy to think that's how technology works.
Exactly, right? And that phone can be a stake pool. That phone can be a mesh net. That phone can actually share power now with people because it's got wireless charging for other devices. So that device now could be the center point of your financial freedom. And so you always have to look at a long-term horizon. You don't look at the 1 year, you don't look at the week, you don't look at the month. You look at the trends and say, where's everything going in 5-10 years? You see there's enormous international pressure for these governments to get their houses in order. The people are putting enormous pressure for them to get their houses in order because the smart ones, they leave, they come to America and Europe, they get educated, and they come back home and try to apply those same standards and thinking at home. So there's enormous pressure to change. And then you show up and you say, let's just change things. You get the systems installed. You have to be very patient. It takes years to do it. But at the end of that, you've now brought millions of people into a new economy. And then that new economy is a crypto economy. It's not a legacy banking economy controlled by Chase and Goldman Sachs.
Or they send money back home and they send back about half of what they made.
Yeah, that's remittances are very common, like the Mexican maid or the Filipino maid or something like that, and they send $100 every month. And actually, right now, remittances they consume 8 to 15%.
It's crazy.
So it's crazy, right? You're a Mexican maid in Los Angeles. You send money back home to mom, and Mexico's $8 comes out for every $100 you send back just to move the money.
You just have to work like 3-4 days just to send your money.
Exactly. It's immoral. It's immoral. And so these types of systems, they'll get adopted because people don't like getting screwed, and they know they're getting screwed, and they just want to be treated fairly.
Do you think users will come from in any tech project or product? I think that you need users to have anything, really. You need users in your economy and your system. Do you think where do you think they'll come from first, or where do you think they will come from? More sort of this 3 billion people that kind of aren't on any type of standard, or do you think they'll come from places? I kind of have this feeling that it's hard to get someone that uses banks, albeit they are, not decentralized, but it seems to be hard to convince some people to use a different type of system that works a little bit differently with a different bit of philosophy when they have something that for the most part works. They can call up their bank if something's fraudulently charged, and it's fixed. Now that obviously isn't the case for many people, for many of these other people in the world. So where do you think users come from first? Do you think it comes from?
You're absolutely right when you say, look, you're not going to change consumer behavior when the system's already working for the consumer. I mean, the issue Microsoft has with Bing versus Google. If Google's working for people, it's super sticky, and it's hard for people to leave that ecosystem. So they can spend $15 billion in acquisitions and R&D, and then they can show all these blind comparisons about how Bing is better. And despite the fact that they have all these things, people say, I like Google more, right? And so that's the issue there. So in my view, it's a real bad deal to go to a legacy system where the people in the system are somewhat happy with it, or at least tolerate it, and then demand that the legacy system, for the sake of a moral purpose or for an equity purpose, change itself. It's just not going to happen. You don't go to Goldman Sachs and be like, please be less corrupt. I know that you're making windfall money, but no, be a nice company. It's just, you don't do that. That doesn't happen. So what you do is you have to build leverage. And so you go to people who have nothing that no one really pays attention to. The reason why you don't see big banks in Ethiopia or other places is because it's just too expensive to do business in those jurisdictions. The lifetime value per customer is less than the cost per customer. It costs more to get them through compliance and build what you're going to make. So if you come in with a radical new innovation that allows these people to suddenly have access to financial services for the first time ever, it's not like they're choosing between PayPal and me. They're choosing between cash and me, and cash that loses 10 or 20% of its value every year because of bad monetary policy or an unstable central bank. So they're like, oh yeah, actually, I think this crypto thing has some merit. Well, here's the thing: by aggregate, you start collectively building billions, eventually trillions of dollars of value. And then you go to the Western world and you say, look, guys, there's all these people, hundreds of millions of them, that now have collectively trillions of dollars in this parallel economy. And the only way you're going to be able to do business with them is to build an interface that honors the values of that system, the privacy, the transparency, the personal control over assets. So you want the money or not? I liken this to what happened to newspapers when the internet came by. So if it was the choice of the media and the newspapers, the internet would be a very different structure. You'd probably be, some gateway, and you pay a subscription to go to each website, and that's how that would work. But instead, something grew in parallel. The newspapers didn't take it very seriously. They said, we're big guys, we make a lot of money, we control the news, consumers will never do this. And the smart ones started realizing, oh God, if we don't adapt to this new model, this other model is so much better than our model. When it becomes consumer friendly and broadly accessible, it reaches a certain critical mass, it's going to kill us. And it turned out to kill a lot of them. So the same thing is going to happen to the financial services industry. When they say, wow, you can do a mini IPO and you can securitize at orders of magnitude less money, and you can have free and fair nice markets on decentralized exchanges, and you can automate regulation and compliance can be automated. Wow, the cost of moving any amount of value anywhere instantly is like a penny. Holy shit, you get credit pretty much everywhere at lower rates from decentralized systems, or you can insure things. And there's millions of people doing this, and regulators are moving in this direction. Fuck, we need to get on this train. So they can try to cling to their own thing, and they'll do what they always do. Like the RIAA, they sued lots of people when BitTorrent was out, and they tried to throw grandma in jail and charge a 12-year-old with $1 million in damages. And those are the dying cries of a business model that's no longer sustainable. But eventually it goes out, and then it gets replaced with a more sustainable, better model that's more consumer friendly. So this is why I don't really focus very much on Europe or America. I mean, it'd be great to see adoption and practical applications, and it's a decentralized ecosystem, so people will try because they'll try to innovate in the backyard. But to me, that's kind of a rigged game, and it's not meaningful for me to go and just try to be yet another mid-sized fish in this gigantic tank of whales. I'd much rather go and change the lives of millions of people who don't have a lot, and then collectively build up enough wealth and power there that can force meaningful changes in the rest of the world and cascade through that. And even if it doesn't, I mean, you still accomplished a magical miracle. You've given some of the poorest people in the world an ability to build wealth and then keep that wealth and protect that wealth, regardless of the situations that happen. And that means they get better medical care. That means that they get better education. It means your children live a better reality than the parents did. And that's the accomplishment of a lifetime. So I'm going to just go do that. I think it's what cryptocurrencies were meant for.
I think that's awesome. I wish I could see more of that kind of side. I've seen it's not easy to see that here because in the U.S. you kind of get what you just said. It's not very. It's kind of a waste of time in some aspects. If I picture. There's this video I remember watching from Andreas Antonopoulos, and he's talking to the Canadian legislation, some Canadian board of team members, and they kind of just grilling them with questions about basically what the heck this Bitcoin system and economy really even does, because they're just so opposed to it, I think. And it's cool that you get to see some of these people and some of those places that I think it serves its purpose a little bit better and can catch on. And it's something that I would love to see myself. But
and
can't.
There are places in the U.S. you can innovate, like Wyoming, for example, is prime for it. I mean, they passed 8 laws, and they're getting very blockchain friendly. It's because ranchers hate bankers.
Yeah.
They got really screwed in 2008, and their economy is changing. I mean, we're going away from oil, and agriculture and oil is big for that state. So they're thinking, well, where do we go from here? And they realized that, if you're a startup, you're saying, do I go to California to Silicon Valley and pay 11, 12% state taxes and live in the most expensive real estate in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and have to do salary negotiations with my developers every 6 months, or do I go move to Cheyenne and be 45-minute drive away from Fort Collins, where Colorado State University is at, pay no state taxes, and have $800 a month apartment rent? It's a pretty good decision, right? And you say, wow, and all the regulations for me to have a certainty and get a bank account and be able to run my company. And by the way, that government's going to upgrade. They're going from paper to a digital system. They're probably going to end up using the first in the nation blockchain-based registration system for businesses. And then we can eventually get property registration done with blockchain and so forth. So Wyoming could actually end up being the most blockchain-friendly state, and probably maybe even the most blockchain-friendly jurisdiction in the entire Western Hemisphere. If they keep moving in this direction, and there's only 500,000 people there, it's very easy to get things done politically if you have a coalition, and you can move very quickly, just like you can in Switzerland or Singapore. So there's still places we're definitely interested in innovating, and the supply chain stuff we do for coffee or for beef in Ethiopia can very easily be ported to do for beef in Wyoming. So we'll try to innovate in those jurisdictions, but we're going to stay out of the Valley and New York and other
Mm-hmm.
markets saturated, and we'll let the Ribbles and the Coinbases and these big guys have fun there, do their IPOs required.
For anyone watching, make sure to hit that thumbs up button. A question I want to ask you, and I kind of don't really ask a lot of these types of questions as much because I'm more interested in sort of some of the philosophical questions and kind of where things are going in the project. But there's a lot of people that just want to know, talk to us about the roadmap of Cardano, things like Shelley, where its progress is, Cardano specifically, and its timeline, and where things are headed right now.
We're doing pretty good. Shelley is almost to a point where we're ready to launch the Shelley testnet. That's going to happen very soon, and that's a massive milestone for us, because this testnet is not like a proof of concept. It actually looks a lot like what the finished system is going to look like. So the purpose of it is just to start building up a critical mass of stake pools. And so we launched the stake pool task force. We've got several hundred people in it. I think several hundred questions have been asked. Gerard Moroni is probably going to go on the Cardano effect and give an update on where we're at there. But the first wave of answers will come out soon. And then when the testnet's ready, we're going to roll over a lot of those people in the task force into the testnet to be the first group of beta testers. So we'll be able to really stress test that thing. Then the next step is going to be getting the incentive system layered onto it. And we're almost finalized on that design. We're running a few more reviews for it, and then layering that on top of the Haskell wallet backend that we built. And then once those pieces are together, we can connect that to Daedalus. And as all those pieces fit together, then we're actually mainnet ready. So then it's just a matter of how confident are we in the software? How much QA do we need to do, and testing do we need to do, and so forth. So we're making rapid progress. The Rust client ships a major update every 2 to 4 weeks. The Haskell wallet backend is going to be on a 3 to 4 week release cycle there. So the release cycles are speeding up dramatically. And we have much better processes, I'd say, now than we did historically 6 months ago or a year ago. So that's the immediate thing, is getting Shelley out the door. Shelley's a spectrum; it's a process. So once you release everything, then there's a gradual handing off of the network from the BFT nodes to the stake pools, and then at some point you wake up, you have 1,000 of them, and the system's totally decentralized. Longer term, we have something called Cardano 2020, which is our vision of what we can get done between now and the end of 2020. And there we have to make meaningful progress in all 3 pillars of a 3rd generation cryptocurrency. So the scalability side, the interoperability side, and the sustainability side. So on the scalability side, that's all about kind of 2 different approaches that have to be done in parallel. One is Ouroboros Hydra, and the other is implementing some sort of layer 2 solution. So Hydra is about sharding the base ledger. And our first major paper in that direction was something called parallel chains. And now we're taking that, we're building on top of that and combining it with sidechains research. And these 2 things together will become Hydra. So there's a few more dirty laundry things we need to clean up on Ouroboros. We have a paper coming out called Ouroboros Chronos, which deals with the clock. And then we have another paper that'll come at some point, or an augmentation to one of our papers, that will deal with spikes of dishonest majority. So that's a characteristic that proof of work has. It's able to gracefully recover from that. We'd like to have a slightly more graceful recovery. But beyond that, then it's all Hydra. And that design will be solidified by sometime in the second half of this year, and then it'll be implementable shortly thereafter. Now, the layer 2 side is probably something like Lightning, and basically what you do is you say you can shard a thread, and then the thread can have a layer 2 on top of it. So you go from, X amount of TPS to X times N to X times N times M. So you can get to crazy speeds with that. The good news is there's so much money going into these layer 2 protocols, and there's so many different groups that are building them that they're already starting to consolidate on some best practices. And it's less of let's do original research, and it's more of just picking a winner that we think is a good protocol to work with. And there's a lot like Spider and others to play with. So Rob Cohen has recently been put into a product management position for that. And we'll build a team around him, and then we'll start post Shelley rolling those features in. Then the interoperability side, that's a dose of pragmatism, and that's a dose of optimism. So on the pragmatic side, you have to decide, what protocols you feel are reasonable to include in our protocol suite. And there, I'd say Interledger and something to do with Lightning are probably the two industry protocols that are pretty reasonable because they're currency agnostic, and there's a lot of people betting on them. But then our optimism is our own research we've done. So that's the NEPA support for proof of work, and then the proof of stake side chains that we've done. So we'll get those things implemented, put in protocol during 2020. And then finally on the sustainability side, that's all about getting the Cardano improvement proposal process formalized, and basically making that process revolve around specifications, not code. So basically you say the end-to-end Cardano is fully specified in math, and so specification documents, and then there's particular flavors, implementations of it. So the Rust client, the Haskell client. But when you have an improvement proposal, the improvement proposal pertains to a formal specification. Then eventually what you can do is you can actually prove that your client follows the spec using a mathematical proof. You can actually, it's called by simulation. So that's a long stretch goal, but that's a direction we'd like to go in and build a process for that. And then finally, we'd like to have a treasury system like Dash does. And we wrote a paper on how to do that out of Lancaster. That was Vin Chang's work. So that just has to be realized. So, that's the long-term roadmap up until 2020 is innovate in those three areas. And, where would we be at by the end of that? We'd be the best performing cryptocurrency in the world. We would be a cryptocurrency that bootstraps almost instantly, a cryptocurrency that can talk to pretty much any other cryptocurrency. We have a great smart contract language and Ethereum interoperability, and the ability to be interoperable with many other things. You can spin up a sidechain for it. And then you also have a sustainable government system that has a way of sorting out how to make decisions and also how to pay for things. And then if we get everything right, it means that we can use that treasury system to renew the IOHK contract and work on it for another 5 years until 2025 or something like that. We have a much more ambitious vision, or talk about particular use cases of these things. But overall, I think it's been a tremendously successful project because we started with deep principles. We started with no preconceptions. We worked from first principles, and we just kind of went from abstract research to a particular vision, and the vision's been gradually getting more refined, and the vision's been gradually getting more achievable. And we're going from broad strokes to very specific, precise statements, and our estimates are getting better, and our ability to deliver is getting better. So we're definitely maturing as a company, and I'm pretty proud of that.
Well, that's good. I think it's ambitious. There's a lot. You just mentioned a whole lot by 2020. I think that.
But it's very generalizable. Like all the consensus work is one team, and they can do that, and then all of the sidechains work is another team, and things like Lightning is another team. And the way we've architected our software, these are all like loosely coupled modules that can gradually get plugged in. And even that we can work in parallel. We actually work on 3 code bases at the same time: a Scala code base, a Rust code base, and a Haskell code base. And we've shown that these guys can ship things independent of each other with limited dependencies.
Gotcha.
So as long as you can go parallel, I think you can achieve all of that. If these are all linear, that's a bit challenging. And some things can't be made parallel. Like 9 women can't make a baby in a month. No matter how many hours they try, it's so you just have to sometimes wait it out. And research is like that. But the good news is the heavy lifting of the research, like the sidechains and Ouroboros and programming language theory agenda, we've already spent 3 years doing that. So there's already a huge amount of stuff that's been done, and it's now just a matter of fine-tuning it and getting it to market, rather than trying to solve hard problems which you don't even know if they can be solved or not. That risk is.
I think you make a good point. I think a lot of it sort of just seems like it's a matter of time now until some of this happens. It's not a matter of if anymore. I think it's just a matter of when. Um,
Right.
what do you, all this aside, all the travel and the Cardano and everything else that you're involved with and the speaking gigs, what do you do for fun? What do you do in your spare time?
I read a lot.
Yeah.
I listen to both audiobooks and read a lot of books on my Kindle. And I used to uh, solve math problems and things like that for fun. Like there's a lot of great books like Counterexamples in Topology, or there's this book I have on the Putnam test, which has lots of interesting problems. And they're a good way to distract yourself on a plane for two to
Yeah.
3 hours. I wish I could do more of that. I also have a ranch in Longmont, so the animals do keep me busy.
Hmm.
I'm up to 4 dogs now, and I said if we get any more dogs, I might start ranching dog meat. So you gotta keep it limited. I'm gonna get yaks in the summer, so that's gonna be an interesting experience. I was in
Ah,
Mongolia playing with all these yaks and Mongolian horses and camels, and I said, "Wow, I love these yaks. They're great animals." And so I came back to Colorado, and I started calling around, and I found this one ranch that sells them, and they said, "Yeah, come back in the spring, and we'll have a bunch of yaks for you." So I'll get a few of them, and I'll get some back from camels, and we'll just have a regular old yak ranch. So that'll be fun.
that's cool. Where do you see yourself after 2020? Do you see yourself still being part of Cardano and beyond? Where do you see yourself in the next few years with Cardano and the cryptocurrency space in general?
Well, I don't think you can ever leave an ecosystem that you founded. I mean, despite the efforts of the Ethereum community, they can't quite get rid of me.
Yeah.
So you're always there one way or another, in spirit or in person. But your role has to change. If you're always in charge, then it's never going to decentralize because you have a cult of personality around a leader. So it's super important that at some point you allow other voices to be heard, and you allow the system to kind of govern itself without your consent or oversight. And you go into kind of an advisor role of it, where you provide wisdom and direction, but that you're just one voice of many. So, my hope is that over time we can take less and less of a significant role, but still make contributions instead of, in some cases, perhaps even bigger contributions than we're doing now, but we're just one of many making contributions. And I think that's the grand challenge. I mean, so far, the only person in the history of our space to do that perfectly was Satoshi. The guy creates something and knows exactly when to leave. And,
Hmm.
it was a little painful for a while, but Bitcoin is truly decentralized as a consequence of that decision. And even if somebody came back and claimed to be Satoshi, nobody would actually believe him, and no one would actually care because Satoshi's
So,
transcended being a person. It's like cultural acknowledgement. Satoshi black guy, or Satoshi could be an Asian woman. Satoshi could be
yeah,
from Venezuela.
could be
It could
multiple people.
exactly it could be multiple people. And so
Could
when
be
you
an
have a
alien.
structure, it could be an alien, it could be a supercomputer, it could be the CIA. Who knows, right? But the point is that because he did that in that way, what Satoshi did was basically create a great exit strategy and a great way for the ecosystem to grow. So
Hmm.
all of us in the cryptocurrency space who create cryptocurrencies and these ecosystems have to have a Satoshi moment where we are capable of walking away and the ecosystem can sustain itself and thrive and become much better without us there. So beyond 2020, that's the goal, is to ensure that the ecosystem is sustainable, and then I take less of a role.
Hmm.
I like to be here because there's a lot of innovation to do, a lot of things to do, and I love the people in this space. It's a lot of fun to meet them and talk to them and see their passion. So I don't want to lose that, but I need to make sure that we don't stay in a position of power for too long.
Makes sense. Totally makes sense. On a final note, I want to ask you, I know the IOHK Summit is coming up. Anything that you want to share about that and what you might be revealing?
Oh yeah, the summit's going to be great. It's so every year we bring the whole company together,
Hmm.
and we keep getting asked, "Hey, why don't you make this a public event?" So we said, "Okay, that sounds fun." So we're bringing the whole company together, every single person, Duncan, Bruno, and Agalos, and myself. Everybody is going to show up, and we're going to do our regular presentations and workshops on everything from zero knowledge cryptography to computation to design and the symphony of blockchains. We're going to have augmented reality and VR, and We're gonna have crypto puzzles that if you solve them, you make money. A hackathon. It's going to be a pretty crazy event, but it's open general public. And then we started inviting people from outside the company to come, and we've gotten some really big names like Rudy Rucker and Stephen Wolfram to commit. And we also, if you buy a VIP ticket, there's a private concert that Clearwater Creedence Revival and Steve Miller Band are putting on. So if you're a Steve Miller fan and you want to listen to the Joker in a very small, intimate setting, a good place to be. So it's going to Miami, April 17th to 18th. Highly recommend you come. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we hope to have a lot of people there. And it's just a great opportunity to come and meet us and our partners and get a sense of what Cardano is all about. And I keep saying, if there's ever a time for me to announce a new product, that's probably a good event to do it at. So I'll have a keynote, and we'll just see where we go with that.
So nothing until then. Keep it under wraps. No promises, though, right?
Come to the summit.
Awesome. Well, anyway, I don't have anything else unless you want to share anything. What I'll do is, I think last time I asked you if there's anything that people want, if there's any way anyone can help support the Cardano community and foundation, where can I point them to? I'll leave a link in the description, or a description in this video after it's done. And
you can go to the forums at cardano.org, or you can go to the official Telegram channel and just say, I'm here, I want to do something, and the moderators will flag you down and find something productive for you.
Or even if people want to learn anything more after watching this video and are intrigued.
Yeah,
Telegram.
I'd say the Telegram channel is probably the best place to start, or the Reddit. Then you can kind of ask your questions or let us know what you're interested in, and we can direct you into the right direction. It's kind of hard to speak in abstractions, right? Because you could, you can be a scientist or a developer, or you can be an investor, or you can be, something. There's a lot of different stakeholders in the cryptocurrency ecosystem, and they all have different questions, and some we can answer and some we can't.
Well, it was a pleasure having you on, Charles. Been about a year, so maybe in another year or sooner, whenever you want to come back on. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
A lot of fun as always. Thank you so much.
Have a nice day.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. So thanks for watching, everybody. I will post some information here about how you can help out if you're interested in following up with Cardano and anything Charles is doing. Make sure to check out the summit if you want. It's in Miami, April 17th to April 18th. And I want to thank you again, Charles, for being on the channel. And hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if you're not a subscriber already. So thanks for watching, guys, and tune in tomorrow, or tune in for some more crypto related information. I'll talk to everybody soon.